get started. Again, my name is Bob Stromberg. I work with Destination Home. This workshop is called Understanding Homelessness, and it is an introduction to the supportive housing system and affordable housing and advocacy here in Santa Clara County. Our work at Destination Home is to be a facilitator and a convener and a piloter of new projects and initiatives. And as part of that work, I lead currently our Housing Ready Communities initiative, which is a community engagement initiative with really two purposes. And those two purposes also apply to this workshop today. The one purpose is to be a public-facing resource to answer questions for folks about homelessness in our community and the solutions to homelessness. A lot of folks have a very little amount of information, so we want to be a resource to folks to help them understand what's going on in the system and understand what's being done about it here in our community. The second purpose of this workshop is to recruit folks to be a part of our action network. We send out action alerts and mobilize folks to participate in public meetings and to email elected leaders to make sure we get housing developments approved and also get new policy and financing in order to make that happen at scale. We're doing a lot in our community from government level and private funding sources and nonprofit organizations to work on ending and preventing homelessness. But frankly, we have to do a lot more, and that's going to require pressure on our elected leaders. Understanding Homelessness is also the name of a new resource, relatively new, on the Destination Home website. And I will be sharing that link at the end of the workshop. I would encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already, and to use it as a resource to share with others in your network as well. It doesn't have every bit of information under the sun, but it is a fantastic start to understanding the challenge, causes of homelessness, and solutions, and what can be done about it, as well as pointing you to some resources about how you can get involved. This initiative is called Housing Ready Communities because about 30 years ago in this country, we dealt with homelessness by saying, okay, Bob, you're experiencing homelessness. You also have a physical health condition and a mental health condition. So what we want you to do, Bob, is to get housing ready. So fix that physical health condition and that mental health condition that you have, and then come back and talk to us, and we'll see if we can think about how we might find you a place to live. At that same time, 30 years ago, somebody thought, well, maybe let's try that the other way around. So let's try with housing first, and we'll help Bob find a home. And then we'll provide the services and assistance that he needs to overcome whatever particular individual challenges he's facing. And that's called the housing first approach. Since then, it has been proven that that is dramatically more successful than the housing ready approach. But the initiative is called Housing Ready Communities because the point is, it's not Bob who lives outside who needs to be ready for housing. It's all of us who already live in homes in neighborhoods who need to be ready for new housing in our neighborhood. And that's really a challenge to everyone that we meet. It's easy to say that I'm in favor of affordable housing, and yes, we need a lot more affordable housing, and to make the arguments about why and for who, but the real challenge comes when that new affordable housing is going to be two blocks up the street. And that yes is the yes that we absolutely have to have. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that's actually a good thing for the neighborhood and for all of us. So I would challenge you all to ask yourselves and those in your lives, are you housing ready? And to help folks get housing ready, we need to be ready in our communities for more housing. A few tips about WebEx may be new to you. It's like many other video meeting platforms. You have, of course, mute and unmute buttons. You can turn your camera on and off. If you're having audio difficulties, the little arrow beside the mute button is useful to resolve some of those. Also, we would encourage you to put your video on, of course, not required to. We're trying to build community and get to know people. And sometimes when I'm sitting in front of a camera, it's a little bit lonely. So that's just a polite request for folks who are with us today. WebEx also has the ability to share emojis to express emotion during the meeting in ways other than speaking, although folks are perfectly invited to speak as well. This is a very small group. We can have some back and forth throughout, as well as during the 2 sections where I'll pause for questions and answers. And we also encourage folks to put stuff in the chat at any point. If there's a question on something that I'm talking about, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll get back to it when we get to our questions period. Or you can also just remember it and ask it in person when we get to that point. And finally, if you need to rearrange your screen so it looks differently, there should be a little layout button somewhere so that you can move things around. There's somebody who's joined us. Good to see you. We start with this slide really because for a lot of people, and I can identify with this emotion as well, homelessness seems so overcomable and complex. There's so many pieces, there's so many players who are attempting to address homelessness. How can I possibly understand it or get involved in it or have any faith in it? And it's true. There are a lot of different nonprofit organizations and government and individuals who are doing a lot of hard work, and the ways that they're connected is not necessarily obvious to somebody who's learning about it for the first time. Individuals who are experiencing homelessness are extremely diverse, have all kinds of different challenges and needs. There's certainly not one type of individual who is experiencing homelessness. But the fact remains that the solution is actually quite simple. If Bob doesn't have a home today and he does tomorrow, his homelessness is over. Now, Bob might have other challenges he needs to address as well, but housing ends homelessness. And frankly, we don't have enough of it in order to do so effectively in our community. This is the agenda for the remainder of the workshop. We're going to talk a little bit more about the homelessness crisis and some data around that. We're going to look at the diversity of those experiencing homelessness. We'll talk a bit in more detail about the housing crisis. Then we're going to look at some of the evidence for proven solutions, a very small bit on the cost of managing homelessness as opposed to ending it. And then we're going to talk about progress. Essentially, I'm asking you to join my team, and nobody wants to join a losing team. So I want to show you some of the stuff that's actually being done in terms of progress in our community, so that we can have hope and optimism in order to keep working together for all the work that is ahead. We're going to talk about our neighborhoods, and then we're going to go to what you can do to get involved and take action. But I want to pause on neighborhoods for just a minute, because of course we want to end and prevent homelessness because it is traumatic suffering for those who experience it, without a doubt. However, the actual end goal is broader and for more people than that. We want to end and prevent homelessness in our community because we want to have a healthy and happy and sustainable neighborhoods and communities for everybody, for those who are sleeping outside tonight and for those who are sleeping inside a home tonight. So in order to focus a little bit on neighborhoods before we keep going, I'd like to take a pause now and ask folks to introduce themselves. We can do this with your voice if you're comfortable, or you can do it in the chat. And so we just want to share our name. If you're with an organization, you can share that if you like. If not, obviously not required. Love to know what city you live in and if you want to share your neighborhood. And then just one thing that you love about your neighborhood. And I'll start. Again, my name is Bob. I work with Destination Home. And I live in San Jose, pretty close to downtown, kind of between downtown and Japantown. And the thing that I love most about my neighborhood is watching the gardens and front porches and all the plants and flowers of my neighbors when I go for a walk, and how that changes throughout the seasons. That's definitely the favorite thing about my neighborhood. So who would like to go next and introduce themselves and share something about your neighborhood? Reshma, go right ahead.
Hello, I'm Reshma Inamdar. I volunteer with Abode Services on their finance team committee, and I live in Fremont, California. What do I love about my neighborhood? I like my neighbors. They're thoughtful, and my neighborhood feels safe to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us, Reshma, and for your important work with Abode Services. Really appreciate you being here. Let's go to what looks like a telephone, something that's ending in 73. Would you like to introduce yourself? And if not, we can come back, but how about let's go to Winona. Would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks for being here.
Hi there. Sorry, I was trying to finish up some other tasks too. So, my name is Winona. Organization. I am associated with a couple of different groups. I have my job. I work actually up at NASA Ames. I homeschool my kids, and so that's a separate organization. And we volunteer at Feed the Block, which is run out of Central San Jose Baptist Church, what is it, Grace Baptist Church, I think. So I'm in South San Jose, that's where we live. And I love being so close to the hills. So.
Thank you, Winona, for all the work that you're doing in the community as well, and thanks for being with us. How about to Alejandra?
Hi there. My name is Alejandra. I live in San Jose. I would say that one of the things that I love about my neighborhood is that we have many amenities that we can walk to. So we're not just dependent on our car. So I do love that we have a drugstore and restaurants that are within walking distance.
Awesome, Alejandra. Thanks for being with us. And David, would you care to introduce yourself? David might not be with us right this second. If you care to later, feel free to please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know a little bit about you and your neighborhood. One of the things that I find interesting about that exercise is that no matter what group I'm working with, who's attending the workshop, what part of the county, whether it's partners or a neighborhood association or a church, or with folks who have experienced homelessness, the things that people say are always almost exactly the same. We love the natural aspects of our neighborhoods. We love the people in our neighborhoods. We love being close to the things that we need, like the grocery store and other kinds of stores and shops and medical facilities, amenities that we need in our neighborhood, parks and locations for our children. These are the same regardless of whether you have a home or not. So I do believe that the goal of really creating beautiful, happy neighborhoods is what unites us, and where we should really focus as our North Star as we work to end and prevent homelessness. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about your neighborhood. Homelessness in Santa Clara County is vast and shocking. Some of you may already be aware of these numbers. This is from the latest count that is now 3 years ago. New numbers are coming actually pretty soon. But there are approximately 10,000 people on any given night who are living in our community without a home. That's a big number. It's hard to imagine 10,000 people in one place and think about all of those folks not having a roof over their heads tonight. But that's the reality of our community. I always want to show this map to drive that point home, but also to really emphasize that homelessness is an issue throughout our community. This is not an issue being faced by one neighborhood or by one city. This is really a problem that we collectively are facing. And what that tells us is that, well, one, we're in it together, but two, we have to address it together. We can't fix homelessness in my neighborhood, say we decide to put up a wall, we make a rule that says no homelessness. If you find someone sleeping outside, then you have to invite them into your home or toss them over the wall. Well, that would end homelessness in my neighborhood, but it wouldn't do much to help what's going on the other side of the wall. So we really have to look at it as something that we have to work together on. Our community plan to end homelessness is one tool that we use to do that together. But it's really important to remember that we all have to be working on it. All of our cities, our county, all of our corporations, and all of our individuals, churches, and neighborhoods. There are also a lot of misunderstanding about who are the folks who are experiencing homelessness. And I think among some people in our community, there's this impulse to really other those who are living outside as some different kind of being than the rest of us. Whereas we know that homelessness is not a character trait. Homelessness is an experience. Homelessness is something that happens to an individual, to a family, could happen to me. So in order to overcome that a little bit, we like to look at some data points to help us kind of see a little bit of the diversity of those who are living outside. The first one, of course, is you may have heard that, oh, those people living outside, they came from somewhere else. Well, we know that the vast majority of those who are living outside today lived inside a house right here in our community. We also know this because of the dramatic numbers of new homelessness that we'll talk about a little bit later in our community, of people losing their homes right here in our community. Another one of the numbers that really jumps out to me here is this 8% children. 8% of 10,000 is no small number. And it is truly sobering to think of hundreds of children who are sleeping outside today. That should really be a call to action to anyone here in our community. And then the last is the percentages listed here among those experiencing homelessness for our neighbors who are Latino or African American. So in the community at large in Santa Clara County, the percent of those who are Latino is just below 30%. I think it's something like 27%. So then why are 43% of those experiencing homelessness Latino? For African Americans, it's much more dramatic. Across the county, among the total population, somewhere between 2 and 3% are Black. However, 19% of those living outside are African American. So if you're Black in Santa Clara County, you are roughly 6 times more likely to experience homelessness than if you're white. This indicates to us that we have racial inequities, first and foremost, in our safety net systems, in our criminal justice system, and in other pathway systems that lead to homelessness. Now, it's easy for me to cite this problem. It is harder for us all to identify a solution and work on fixing this. So that really is a call to action for all of us in all of our organizations to start thinking and working and pressuring about how we can fix this inequity. And I truly believe that if we're able to make these systems more equitable for people of color, those systems will be better for everyone who encounters them. So I think that's a serious part of our work to end and prevent homelessness here in the county. This slide with Amy's photograph, I include because the presentation includes a lot of data and charts, but it doesn't include a lot of faces. So it is ultimately of utmost importance that we at least pause for a moment to remember that we're talking about people, mothers and grandfathers and uncles and cousins who are suffering in the experience of homelessness right now. So let's not forget the Alejandras and the Davids and the Remishes and the Bobs who are living outside. So I want to do a little test with you all. We're going to do this in the chat, or you can unmute, whichever you like. Either is fine. I wanted to ask what folks think. What is the cause of homelessness? Or what are the causes?
Well, I mean, housing prices are so high and wages haven't kept up. And, you know, once you go down that spiral of depression, you know, and it's, anyway, that's what I think.
Yeah. Excellent response. Housing prices. And what do you say? Incomes haven't kept up. And then spiral of depression, obviously. Something that's overlooked by a lot of folks is sort of, you see someone suffering living outside. You put me outside for a year and then have like nobody talk to me and I don't get enough nourishment and I don't have any protection from the elements. I'm not going to be able to talk to you the way that I am today in a year. No doubt about it. Like I would be in pretty rough shape after that experience. Anybody else want to share some thoughts on what the causes of homelessness might be? No safety net from Alejandra, thank you for that. It's definitely the case, and more so the case for some more than others, as I was just talking about. Any other causes that come to mind? Well, those I think are some great answers, but I think it's important to focus on it for a minute because a lot of times people want to focus on individual failure as the cause of homelessness. Or people want to focus on, more recently, I've heard a lot of mental illness as the cause of homelessness. That actually people have mental illness and then they experience homelessness. And in a recent book, actually, it was pointed out that if you compare the prevalence of mental illness in communities across the state and across the country, and you overlay that with the prevalence of homelessness, there is no correlation. So in places where there's higher mental illness, there is not higher homelessness. But if you overlay a map of where housing prices are really high, and you overlay that with where there's prevalence of homelessness, there is without a doubt a correlation between those two things. So I think it's important for us when we're talking with our neighbors and out in the community and to our elected leaders to really look upstream at the root causes of homelessness and make sure that leaders are not misleading others in the community about what causes homelessness. Now, you named most of these already, but homelessness is caused by income inequality. And we'll look at one example of a family in a minute. By lack of affordable housing. We have a severe lack of affordable housing in this community, particularly for those with lowest incomes. We'll see some of that data in a minute as well. Alejandra said no safety net. Well, we certainly have had an underinvestment in programs serving our residents in need, our neighbors in need. And then, of course, as I was mentioning, systemic and structural racism, that while some policies have changed over time for the better, without a doubt, there is still work to do, and there are still lasting impacts of those policies from the past. We see this in our homelessness prevention system here in the county. That Destination Home works with Sacred Heart Community Service and a number of organizations throughout the community to provide rental assistance to those who are at imminent risk of losing their home. As of right now this year, I believe we are helping roughly 2,000 families every year and hoping to bring that up to 2,500 in the coming years. But as you can see, those who are most likely to be receiving this assistance are those that are classified as extremely low income. And that's income for a family of 4 that currently is $47,000 or less. But we know that we have households who have incomes of $30,000, of $20,000, of $15,000. And we'll look at some of the math about how difficult it is for folks to maintain a stable home at that income level. We also know that those with the lowest incomes, as you see on the right side of this chart, are burdened the most by rent. Right? We just saw the cause of lack of affordable housing. 74% of those in that lowest income group are paying more than half of their income in rent. Many of whom paying much more than half of their income in rent. I've met individuals and families that are paying 80 and 90 and 95% of their income in rent. We also know that the lack of affordable housing is most severe for those in that lowest income group that you see on the top chart here. So of 100 households, families in the lowest income group who are looking for a place to rent for their family, only 29 of those families can find someplace affordable. So 71 cannot find a place that they can afford. So are definitely at risk of homelessness. Or if are experiencing homelessness, have a really difficult time ending that homelessness because of this barrier. So let's look at one family here on the bottom. We know that throughout Santa Clara County, there are more than 65,000 families who are renters in this lowest income group. This is extremely low income, or sometimes referred to as ELI. Of those 65,000, as we just saw in the previous 2 slides, more than 45,000 are what's called severely rent burdened. That means you pay more than half of your income in rent. So let's look at one family. The federal government says the standard should be, and it's sort of good financial practice within a household, your rent should not be more than 30% of what your income is. So let's say this is my family, Bob's family of 4, and we are earning $41,000 a year collectively as a family. So if we're going to spend 30% of that income in rent, I need to find an apartment or a house for my family of 4 for $800 a month. Please raise your hand or put a link in the chat if you can find me a place to rent for my family for $800 a month. You know you can't find it. It doesn't exist. For $800, you can maybe rent a room for your family of 4 and all sleep in one room. Although I've heard recently that a room costs more than that. So, okay, fine. I'm not going to be able to find something for 30% of my income. I'm going to become severely rent burdened and pay 50% of my income. So if I'm paying 50% of my income, of our family's income, then I need to find a place to live that costs $1,400 a month. Who can find me a place for my family of 4 that costs $1,400 a month? You cannot.
Not in this area.
Not in this area. We know that the average or sort of median rental price for a 2-bedroom, or in this case probably needs to be a 3-bedroom, is probably more than $3,000 a month at the market rate. But let's say I find a good deal and I find a place that my family of 4 can fit in. It's not really in the nicest neighborhood, doesn't have a great park nearby, not close to the grocery store really, but it only costs $2,800. So if this family, Bob's family of 4, is paying $2,800 in rent, how much money do I have left over for medicine or for groceries or for a birthday party or for a trip, a day trip out of town with the family, or a medical emergency? In this case, I would have exactly $0 for all of those other things that I need in my family. So clearly, the market and our community does not provide something that is affordable or sustainable for families with lower incomes. What's the solution? More apartments that are affordable. That's why at Destination Home, we focus on not only supportive housing, that is the best solution for ending homelessness, but we really need to focus on affordable housing, but affordable housing specifically for this extremely low income or ELI group. We have to prioritize it if we're going to stop additional homelessness from happening to our neighbors in our community. I'm going to pause very briefly before I go to the second half to see if there are any questions about what we're talking about thus far. I see a question here that provides the title of the book. Oh, I'm not going to be able to remember off the top of my head. We can connect after. Send me an email. Send us an email and say, oh, it was just released. It has some title like Housing Ends Homelessness. I don't think that's it, but it's something like that. And I think you can find it. I think it got a lot of attention. Any other questions about the math or extremely low incomes? Also give me a chance to drink some water. All right, we'll plow through the second half here and see what we can talk about at the end. So as I mentioned earlier, we have in this community a community plan to end homelessness. This is a collective plan that was put together by Destination Home, by all of the organizations that make up the system of care of homelessness, by cities in our community, by the county. And this plan is really a strategic framework to guide our work together to make sure of 2 things. 1, that we're working together toward the same goals. And 2, that we're holding ourselves accountable to high and aggressive metrics. If we're not meeting high goals and metrics, then we need to change the plan. And this plan has both of those. I would encourage you to take a look at it. It is on our website, as well as the websites of the county and city of San Jose and elsewhere. And the primary objective of the community plan to end homelessness is this additional housing production. So both supportive housing to end homelessness and deeply affordable housing in order to prevent homelessness. So I've said supportive housing now twice in the last 4 minutes. For a lot of folks, and frankly for me when I started doing this work, supportive housing doesn't really mean much. And it becomes this kind of scary thing or mystical thing. What is supportive housing? And people use a lot of inappropriate words to talk about it. But supportive housing is quite simply an apartment building, or actually it doesn't even have to be an apartment building. It could be a house. It's a place to live that also includes the services that folks need to overcome their individual challenges. That's all supportive housing is. And in this community, as across the entire country, as is the best practice everywhere now, supportive housing uses the housing first approach. So it doesn't put up any barriers for Bob, who's having challenges, before I get to move into supportive housing. I get to move into supportive housing, and then I have the services available to me to overcome whatever I may be facing individually. And this wheel graphic is designed in order to demonstrate what some of those services are, because there's some things that are obvious to people, like of course, physical health is an obvious kind of service that someone might need. But there are also other services like family reunification and connection with my community that are incredibly valuable for anyone moving into a new home or living in a home. I need that where I live. I need to have connections to my community. And if I had severed relationships with my family, I would be in a bad spot if I lost my job. So all of these things are really important for the successful life for anyone, including those in supportive housing. But does it work? So sounds nice, sounds great. Obviously helpful to people. Can't see how it wouldn't be. Have a home when you didn't before, have help to overcome whatever you're dealing with. What do we think? If we take 100 folks from living outside and we move those 100 folks into supportive housing today, next year or the year after that, how many of those folks are going to be still stable and in those permanent homes? What percent?
I don't know, maybe 80%.
80%? All right, an optimist. I like it.
Especially if they get to continue with that.
Yeah. Anybody have a counter proposal? Higher or lower? Somebody says 30. In Santa Clara County, the success rate for supportive housing is 96%. This is not some miracle. This is not because we are super awesome in Santa Clara County. This is because this is the success rate everywhere. It is almost always north of 90%, and it is by far the most successful intervention to end homelessness. No other intervention comes even close to having this rate of success. It is the way to end homelessness. The problem is we don't have enough supportive housing for everyone who needs it. So that's why we keep pushing to have more. For example, in kind of the last 6 years, more than 17,000 individuals have been permanently housed who were living outside. Now, not every single one of these, actually a pretty small number of these, actually needed supportive housing. They moved to other types of permanent housing that they could afford. But it's a curious number, perhaps, because I told you at the beginning that there are 10,000 people living outside. So if there are 10,000 people living outside and we were able to help 17,000 people move from living outside to living in a home, why are there still 10,000 people living outside? And this is the most depressing part of the presentation, because every single month in our community, our county and our system of care and tons of organizations are helping, I don't know, 200, 250 individuals move from living outside into a permanent home. But in that very same month, 300 or 350, no, not 350, that's too high. 300 or 275 are losing their homes. So in other words, every single month we're taking one giant leap forward, but we're taking 1.6 leaps backwards. So we can't end homelessness unless we also prevent new homelessness. So we need supportive housing for people who are living outside today, but we need deeply affordable housing so people can afford where they live and they don't become homeless next month. Somebody breaks their leg, there's a separation or a divorce, and income is lost in the household. Folks who are earning $25,000 and $30,000 and struggling to pay rent in a room for 4 people are going to be in serious trouble if anything bad happens to their family. We have to have homes that are affordable, and we're not going to get them from the market. We have to push to do it using private contributions from corporations. We have to have more funding from our local governments, from our state government, from our federal government. We've done a lot in our community in the past years. We're going to see some numbers here in a minute, but we're nowhere close to the need. We have to push a lot harder. The goals of the community plan to end homelessness are aggressive. They're also not maybe aggressive enough to really get to the kind of scale that we need. The primary goal, as I mentioned, was to move people obviously from living outside into a permanent home. Our goal for these 5 years is 20,000, and we are on pace after the first 2 years to getting there, with almost 6,000 folks permanently housed already. The next goal for the community plan that I'm going to talk about is growing the homelessness prevention system. And I mentioned this number earlier. We're currently helping more than 2,000 families a year, and we hope to get that up to 2,500. But this is basically, there's a little bit more that goes with it, basically rental assistance. So Bob's going to lose his home in 2 months because he lost his job or he broke his leg. What Bob needs is cash to pay rent so that that doesn't happen until his leg gets better or he can find a place that's cheaper or something. So what we need in order to grow this number is money. We need to raise more money from government and from private sources in order to help more families. We saw this very effectively done to help many more families during the pandemic, and that kind of work is needed in our community at a much larger scale going forward. We also need to, as I indicated previously about this 1.6 steps backward, we have to reduce the number of folks who are experiencing homelessness for the first time in our community. This chart is a little bit difficult to read, but the gray bar shows in 2019, there were almost 5,000 people who were newly experiencing homelessness in our community, lost their home, experienced homelessness for the first time. Last year, that number was down to just over 3,000. So this trend is looking good. There's a little bit of a fear that because of the aid from the federal government and the state government and private sources that I just mentioned during the pandemic, that we were able to prevent a lot more homelessness that maybe would have happened otherwise. And now that those eviction protections are going away, and some of those resources, emergency resources are going away, are we going to see this number go back up again? But this has to be a target that we continue to focus on. We have to prevent more homelessness if we're ever to end it. I've talked a lot about housing production. One of the key tools to produce the supportive and deeply affordable housing that we need has been the 2016 Measure A Affordable Housing Bond that the voters of Santa Clara County approved by 66.3% or something. No, it has to be more than that. 67%, just barely over the threshold. And that brought $1 billion to our community. And you can see on the progress chart here how many new homes have been completed to end and prevent homelessness and how many are on the way. I want to contrast this, though, to the 45,000 number I shared before. There are 45,000 households in the lowest income group who are renters who are paying more than half of their income in rent. So many of those families are at risk of homelessness. This number gets us close to 5,000. 5,000 is not close to 45,000. So it's not to criticize this measure, it's to say we need many more measures. And this money is going to run out. We're going to build all of the housing that we could with that money. When I say we, the community as a whole, and we're going to need to have that resource replaced with other resources to really get to the level that we need. Supportive housing is moving forward throughout a large portion of our community. This map shows where supportive housing is located. And we really do need to be building housing in all of our neighborhoods where housing makes sense. As we discussed at the beginning, we're talking about neighborhoods. Housing isn't great everywhere. You don't want to build housing super far away from grocery stores and medicine and neighbors that people need. But as long as you have access to transportation and the amenities that people need, we should be building more deeply affordable and supportive housing there. This is a drawing or a rendering of a supportive housing development that's actually very close to my home. This is Villas on the Park, and this one is 100% supportive housing that is focused on those who have high service needs, who experienced homelessness for multiple years or on multiple occasions, and have some sort of permanent chronic disability, disabling condition. This is what it looks like today. Truly beautiful building, has won architectural awards. This was developed by Affirmed Housing and Path Ventures, and Path is the service provider and operator of the building. This is another example in Cupertino. This is called The Veranda. It was developed by Charities Housing. And this is a different model. This is 1/3 supportive housing for folks who have previously experienced homelessness. And the remainder of the homes there are for extremely low income qualifying households. So those with really low incomes. And this one also happens to be dedicated explicitly for older adults. There is a very large percentage of older adults among those experiencing homelessness. And so we sometimes focus those new developments for that group. This is a picture of one that's coming that I'm really excited about, because this is in San Jose on Parkmore, and you see in the back right of the picture, that is a church. And this is Lutheran Emmanuel Church. And they decided many years ago that they wanted to build supportive housing on their land. And they moved forward with that and identified a nonprofit developer. In this case, it's Midpen Housing. They also identified private funding sources. John Sobrato is donating to this development. So it's exciting for that partnership, but also exciting because we have a lot of faith communities in our community that do have excess land that could be built on top of, or a parking lot goes underground and there's housing on top. The church here, I think, also gets shared use of community spaces, maybe an office. So we hope to see a lot more of these partnerships with faith communities to bring more affordable housing and supportive housing to our community. This is also for seniors, same model, 1/3 supportive housing and the remainder are deeply affordable to prevent homelessness. This is in Gilroy. This is developed by Danco Communities. And the last one I want to show is a drawing. This is going to be in Milpitas, and this one is specifically for families. This is also the same 1/3 supportive, 2/3 deeply affordable model, and this will be developed by RCD Housing. So this is just a review of what we talked about. We looked closely at what the challenges are about how homelessness impacts us all in our neighborhoods, not only those who are living outside, but everyone. And if we're to address it, we have to make our neighborhoods better for those living in a home and those who cannot. We talked about the diversity of those experiencing homelessness and how the housing crisis is really untenable for those with low incomes due to the cost of housing, lack of affordable housing, and incomes that have in no way kept up. And we did talk about it before, but we need those jobs. It'd be great if the incomes go up, but we're not going to survive without postal workers and delivery people and nurses and teachers in some cases, and people working at the store, and you name it. There's all kinds of jobs that we need to have in our community. And unless they can pay a lot more, which it doesn't seem to be happening, we really have to produce more affordable housing for those folks. We also talked about the solution, and that supportive housing is actually proven to end homelessness, both here and across the country and really around the world. We looked at some of the progress that we're making and talked about how it's wonderful, and really it's inspiring that 5 years ago, we had fewer than 500 homes with supportive services in our community, and today we have thousands. And that's because we decided as a community that that's what we needed to do. We passed the housing bond at the county level, and we've moved forward in big ways in our cities and with corporate partners and in our neighborhoods, but it's still simply not enough. We have to do more. Managing homelessness is actually more expensive than ending homelessness. For example, for those who are the most vulnerable in our community, we did a cost study. You can find this on our website. It's called Home Not Found. This is now 5 or 6 years old, but the cost study looked at only county expenses, so it doesn't account for private nonprofit expenses that they're having with private donations. But at county expenses, those who are the most vulnerable, sort of this top 5 or 10%, it costs roughly $60,000 a year to provide services to somebody who's living outside. And that's not providing them a home. That's just responding to whatever emergencies they're having out there in the community. If that same individual lives in supportive housing, those costs drop to $12,000 or $10,000 a year. So in many cases, it is more cost effective to end homelessness than it is to manage it. And we also looked at some pictures to really see that supportive housing are tremendous assets to neighborhoods. There's this myth around affordable housing that it's going to decrease property values in the neighborhood for individual homeowners. And that is simply not the case. There have been studies actually right here in our community that show there's no negative impact to property home values of nearby single-family homes near affordable housing, and in some cases even demonstrate an increase, because if you have a vacant lot or a neighborhood that needs additional amenities, sometimes the arrival of affordable housing or supportive housing can be something that spurs that brings additional benefits to the neighborhood. So before we go on to questions, I do want to ask you all to help me with some feedback. I have a short poll here, or a survey. There are 8 questions. I'm going to activate it, and for those who are in the app, you should see it pop up inside the app. You shouldn't have to go to any other website. And if you can take some time to answer those questions before we finish, that'll help us do our work more effectively and improve this workshop. So how to get involved? There are a couple steps that I would recommend for folks. One is we host an every other month action meeting. It's kind of an organizing meeting for people who are involved with our advocacy work in order to catch people up to speed on what the current advocacy priorities are and where people can jump in. It's also an opportunity. We do breakout rooms to get to know other people in the community who are working on homelessness and affordable housing advocacy. And we create space in that meeting for other partners to share what their advocacy priorities are so that we can collaborate and support each other better. So keep your ear open for that. Invite a friend, and if you haven't, please do sign up to be a part of the Action Network. That basically means on the Destination Home website, sign up to join the mailing list and check the box for being an advocate, part of our Action Network. And then help us grow the movement. So reach out to folks who have questions. Maybe they don't want to get involved, they just want to have questions answered. We have open office hours. I'm going to put links in the chat for these things in just a moment. We have open office hours if you want to talk with somebody on our team a little bit more about specific questions. Feel free to sign up for that. And then watch your email inbox for action alerts. So action alerts will come when we need to go to a public meeting or a community meeting or write to our council members or board of supervisors in order to get the policy and financing and housing approved to end and prevent homelessness. And again, I will repeat, don't forget the Understanding Homelessness resource on our website. It really is a great thing if you meet anybody who has questions about homelessness and what's being done. It's a great place to point people. So I will stop there and see what questions folks have. Let me pull up these links really quickly, since I just mentioned them. And then I will get to the questions in the chat, but if somebody has a question they'd like to speak, please go ahead.
I was going to just ask about ongoing maintenance and upkeep for the supportive housing and the funding. Is there current funding to maintain that? I mean, you remember, the old tenement housing project type of thing. I think that was one of the problems that they had, was they built them and then they never took care of them.
Great question. So I am not a super expert on this topic, but I think I have at least somewhat of a satisfying answer. I'm going to answer in 2 ways. So one, the financing for an affordable housing development does include financing that's set aside for maintenance. So for fixing things that are broken. So that's included in the plan for the development going forward. Now, of course, there can be catastrophes that may require additional financing and funding, and so that's going to require the will of those public partners, the city and the county and others, to step in a moment of kind of dramatic or unexpected need. The other part is the services dollars that pay for the services for the individuals who live there. The county Measure A dollars, for example, that can only be spent on the construction and maintenance of the building. So the service dollars have to come from somewhere else. And our county Office of Supportive Housing and the Board of Supervisors have been committing those dollars for the long term to maintain those services over time. It's a great question. David, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, I think it's an excellent presentation you give, Robert.
Thank you.
One problem, I find is that people don't really appreciate the cost of these housing developments, the type that you showed. And, we have to maybe show people that there is a big cost, and we have to get people to look at what the priorities are for our community. I think you made a good points there about employment and about the cost of homelessness if we don't build the housing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm from Toronto, and one thing we're working here is to say we can't be spending all this money on military spending when people don't have a place to live. And sometimes that's a difficult topic to open up, but we have to set some priorities. And the basic dignity of people is very important. And we have opioid crisis happening in all our major cities, and it's largely a product of homelessness. So I encourage you to keep, speaking out.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks for joining us. Yeah, there's, people will often try to do this math I've seen as an argument against affordable housing, that you take the total cost of production of housing, which has gone up dramatically in recent years, without a doubt. It is not a cheap thing to provide. But you can't take that cost and compare it to one individual, because when you build affordable housing, that is going to be affordable for at least 55 years. And we just talked about the fact that many folks who need supportive housing are already older adults. So this is a resource and a service for the community for a long time. And I think in most instances, probably for longer than those 55 years, because of the commitments of our governments. So it's not a one-time thing that then gets kind of spent and then it's gone. The resource is still there. So it's not the same as, buying someone lunch and then they eat the lunch and the lunch is gone. Nobody can eat the lunch again. But the affordable housing is there for the long term. So it really is a long-term investment. We're at time, but I do see one other question here. Is there some type of co-op for childcare, and shall I say single parents? I'm not super awesome in terms of my knowledge on this. I do know that in some of the affordable housing developments that are being built, that is something that is included. The problem that is faced sometimes is that there's not a dedicated funding source for that. So for example, I just said some of the Measure A dollars, this applies to some other financing sources too, cannot be spent on anything other than the housing. And so if there's additional services there, it needs another revenue source. So the city needs to either have that priority and put that money in, or come up with private resources. So that is something that exists though in some of those developments, to be sure, and it is a need in the broader community that needs to be met, especially even more so now, sort of post-pandemic. Is there any one last question before we go?
This is probably too long a question, but I was wondering, what do you, and maybe, for another workshop, what do you think San Francisco has done right and wrong? It's probably too long.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not I'm not an expert on what San Francisco has done, nor to be able to say what's right and wrong. I have kind of little pieces of information about some things that, like, oh, that was good, or oh, that wasn't good. So yeah, I wouldn't want to comment in this space about their jurisdiction. That's the unique thing about Destination Home, is we really do focus only on Santa Clara County. So I am not nearly as aware as I should be about what's going on in Alameda County or in San Mateo County or in San Francisco. But we probably should be looking more to our neighbors. I mean, we do some, of course, but to see what's successful elsewhere and what's not, to make sure that we're learning. All communities are different, but still, there's learning to be had.
Right. I think it's probably, you know, the flow in of the unhoused is probably greater than the flow to housing, probably, you know.
That's the principal problem today.
Yeah.
We're going to keep working on it together. Thank you all so much for being here with me. I really appreciate your time. And go out there and spread the word, and I'll hope to see you again. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.